Hello and welcome, fellow motorsports fans. It has happened a lot sooner than expected. Jamie Chadwick has won a race in IndyNXT, and as always, I'm here to tell you all about it, but traditionally, we begin on the lowest step of the ladder. We begin today's journey in Australia with the second round of the Australian Formula 4 Championship, and truth be told, it has been largely like the first one, with James Pizzique in utter domination mode with another hat-trick, but the battles behind have been ever so slightly different. The pecking order has been largely the same, but Nicolas Stati sort of as the centerpiece of is he on the podium or is he in the midfield in that sort of bracket, and this time he did have to fight a little more. He's been under pressure, in particular in the second race from Sebastian Amadio, and then on the flip side in the third race he actually beat the otherwise invincible looking P2 Blake Purdy to said P2 in the last race, so you know that isn't an uncontested spot anymore either. So outside of Pizzique probably absolutely running away with the championship, we should expect things to heat up a little bit more going forward. Over in Europe, we had the third round of the Formula 4 Central European Championship. Once again, it's not the Czech F4 Championship, even though it looks like it is. And truth be told, it's been a little bit sad this time around, because not only, yes, PHM wasn't competing, we knew this, they're not doing a full season program, but also other teams have pulled out of this particular round. At least the grid has been very, very small with, I believe it was only 11 different cars. So not the most interesting battles all around, unfortunately. We had Oscar Wirtz largely dominating the weekend. He even won the second race after stalling on the grid, if you can believe that. So quite the comeback, but yeah, he only had to go through a handful of cars. And unfortunately, his main rival, Kirill Kutskov, who we know from the Saudi Arabian F4, they are on very similar pace, but he's not in a Genta, he's in a Mafia racing car, and it didn't really look like a fair battle. Kutskov just didn't have anything to defend himself with really in that second race. So a bit unfortunate there. Oscar Wirtz looking like an overwhelming championship favorite at this point in time. The local kids, though, are also stepping up a bit in the absence of PHM, and most importantly, we've had Miroslav Mikesh, I believe he's pronounced, who actually also got past Kirill Kutskov in the aforementioned second race, beat him to P2 on merit, on pace. That was very impressive to see. And then even better, Max Karhan, I hope that's pronounced, actually fighting back past Oscar Wirtz in the last race, and not just for any podium position, but he actually beat him to the race win. Purely on merit, no shenanigans, no fuckery, just, you know, being the quicker guy at that point in time. And I mean, it was a very close battle, don't get me wrong, but yeah, a very deserved victory and phenomenal to see. This is the kind of performances that you can really only find in these smaller F4 series, where it's not just all about, you know, the Premas and the MPs of this world going up against each other. Last but not least, a shout out to Frenchman Jonathan Corrarella, that one, Jonathan we call him. He's scored 2 really good podiums, consistent upper midfield runner, and just, you know, very solid weekend performance all around. The big F4 series, though, is the Spanish F4 series, and this one was largely characterized by, ironic because I just mentioned it, a battle between MP Motorsports and Campos, and then Strouven in there by himself driving for Roden because he's just fantastic. But yeah, really, if you're not part of one of these two big teams, you are having a bit of a rough time in Spanish F4. It really looks a bit like the Italian in that sense, where if you're not in the top teams, you're just not really getting near the points unless there's lots and lots of accidents, and even then it can be quite tricky. This time around, we had Keanu Alazari firmly step up to the role we sort of presumed he'd have going into the season. He looks like a firm championship favorite, got a pair of wins, got another P2 on top, and is now in the championship lead as he should be. Honestly, nothing really worth talking about. This is just a kind of performance we expect. It looked absolutely brilliant, but it's nothing surprising in that sense. More surprising was Ernesto Rivera actually finding his maiden victory in the second race, and I thought the way he did it was very cool because it wasn't just putting it on pole or like capitalizing on a carnage race. Well, it was in a sense, but not with accidents ahead of him, but instead just two very good restarts where he picked off first Peebles and then Al-Azhari on two separate restarts to take the lead and subsequently the victory. So a hard-fought one as well. Yes, it was a super messy race. There barely was any green laps in that one, and really a tiny bit of a disgrace considering the level this is supposed to be. But nonetheless, yeah, you can't really blame Rivera for that, can you? On the flip side, round 1 star Lucas Fluscher was very good as a consistent point runner. I believe it was even 3 sixth places. Correct me if I'm wrong, but you know, just consistently scoring good points. But he did not look like the front runner at all. He never really threatened a podium or anything like that. So, bit of an odd one. Let's see how he bounces back in the next couple of rounds, whether this is an anomaly or whether the first round was a bit of an anomaly. We will find out in no time. We do need to talk about some of the young guns as well though, because you know, I've been talking about these guys since the Formula Winter Series, really looking forward to their debut, and this is mainly René Lammers, to a lesser extent Enzo Van, because both, and again mainly Lammers, are still very rough to watch, just like mistakes and getting caught up in incidents and still not really qualifying up the sharp end either. But you can tell the pace is already there, like with both of them really. They're both stepping up in terms of pace. They are fighting, they are moving forward in the races, but keeping out of trouble consistently to be anywhere in the championship just isn't the thing yet. Both of those look like they probably will need a second year in this category, or at least it would do them a lot of good just to sort of iron out all of these mistakes. But don't get fooled by their lack of points. The pace is there, you can see it if you watch these races. Last but not least, a short shout out for Nathan Tighe, because so far he looks like one of the most promising rookies and one of those that didn't do an awful lot of preseason running either, with a personal best finish of a second place in the third race. And crucially, he kept the pressure on Chiara Al-Azhari all the way until the end as well, as the only driver to do so. So a very, very competitive run. Now then, let's go to the slightly faster cars. Over in Zandvoort, we had the third FRECA round, one of the most important junior Formula Championships out there, and the Finnish tiger Tuukka Taponen has finally fulfilled the prophecy by winning the first race, keeping Rafa Camara behind him all race long. He really had to work for that one. Yes, unfortunately in the second race he did sort of get caught up behind eventual midfield winner Noah Stromstedt and had to settle for P6, so it's not like he is back to the dominant form we've seen over the winter. But nonetheless, this is more of the Tuukka we'd expected, and he is still firmly one of the front-running guys in the series, even if the title already looks out of reach. Main reason for this is Rafa Camara still in full-on just bully mode at this point. 5 wins and a P2 out of 6 races is disgusting to say the least. Even in like a lesser competitive F4 series, this would, you know, cause people to have a look at what you're doing. In this series, it's absolutely outrageous. If he was a rookie, we'd already be talking about him as, yeah, when can he get to F2 and do a Kimi? Yes, obviously, it's not quite the same level of hype. Also largely because he's gotten, you know, his ass handed to him by Kimi over the last couple of years. But nonetheless, yes, Rafa Camara is a fantastic racing driver. If you've somehow missed his career up to this point and then only maybe watched him against Kimi last year or something, and you weren't fully aware of how good he is, there we go. He's even better than, I guess, the people I've followed him for longer thought. This level of domination is insane. I do want to highlight the other Prema boys once again though, because they remain 2 of the most key figures in the series, and honestly most importantly to me personally is James Wharton, just because he's looking so much quicker than I would have anticipated going into this season, but also he is having an incredibly rough weekend, and this was no different. In the first race he actually put it on pole. Prema looked dominant in that quali session throughout, but nonetheless, yes, he had to beat Camara to do so. So a fantastic lap. And then he spun, I believe, even on the first lap, but very early on into that race. Yes, it was a wet one, but nonetheless, spinning out from the lead is really not something you can afford when you already had a bunch of retirements in the championship. And then in the second race, he got spun as well. So essentially, his championship is already absolutely ruined, despite what looks like great pace. Like, honestly, the pace he's displaying here, looks like he's going to be fighting for wins later in the season, that kind of thing, and he could have made maybe even a late surge for the title. Yes, Camara is too dominant for that anyway, but with these points there is no way, even if this was a more open, more traditional championship battle. Yugo Chukwu, unfortunately, there's not even as much upside to talk about, because quite frankly, he has just been struggling all around a little bit. Yes, he's scoring points and that, but it's not impressive, to say the least. I hope he can find another gear somewhere. In GB3 he's looking better, but not much better either. He's just not displaying any sort of front running ability in either of those series, which is a bit unlike the Yugo we've known from years gone by. So I hope he can find another gear soon. Last but not least, quick shout out to Alessandro Giusti, just because I think we've never even talked about him on the channel really, but he's been quietly excellent all year long, and this time he's got a pair of podiums and he is also now P3 in the championship. So really not a guy you should underestimate, even if he is more on the, less flashy side of things, for lack of a better phrase. We did have another championship on a very similar level though, and this was Eurocup 3 going on. And once again, much like the Spanish F4, this championship is all about MP Motorsports versus Campos. And in the last couple of rounds, we had MP really just dominating the series, but this time the chokehold was broken and it was Christian Ho for Campos instead, the man of the weekend, with a pair of wins. And then he looked set for at least a podium, if not better, in the third race before retiring. I think it was a mechanically related retirement, just because there wasn't a replay or anything to show it, but I didn't read up on it, so correct me if he's been in an incident. I don't know about it. Either way, he looked absolutely rapid, a bit like the Christian Ho we expected going into the season, but I mean, truth be told, yeah, he's the ace driver for Campos in this championship, and whether or not he can win the title, I think, will largely come down to the team. Talking about the championship, this now leaves us with a bit of an awkward situation where we have three separate MP Motorsports drivers, Javier Segura, Owen Tangevelo and Bruno Del Pino, all tied for the championship lead at 80 points, with Christian Ho now closing in. And you'd expect this will stay close for the time being. Out of these MP boys, I do want to highlight Tangevelo, just because I feel like he might be the slowest of the trio, which is a little bit against what we've seen in the winter preseason round or whatever it was called and stuff. So this might change, but at the very least he looks super consistent, and of course this is a key feature to have if you want to win a Junior Formula Championship. So don't count him out, even if he didn't quite have any front-running pace this time around. I do want to highlight some of the other breakout runners this time around though, because let's face it, this is really what these championships are all about, isn't it? And one of the ones we've talked about in the winter series is Alexander Abkazava, with a fantastic weekend after being one of those horrendous backmarkers throughout his stint in F4. I'm talking disgracefully slow in some of these, no offense obviously, but it just wasn't pretty to watch. And not only is he looking significantly better ever since he stepped up to faster machinery, but this time he was actually fighting for wins, and if you can believe it or not, he did score a win in the third race, which also is the first win in the category for Santalog Racing, so a cool kind of storyline there. But yeah, just Abkazava winning was mental, completely unforeseeable really, and I hope this can continue, because what a turnaround he's had this year in terms of his personal career trajectory. A guy where the, increase in performance maybe isn't quite as surprising, but nonetheless very nice to see, especially if you are hoping for some more German talent on the Formula ladder at some point, and it's Valentin Klus, who I thought last year in the Italian F4 was quite underrated just because he was in that awkward zone of the car was never good enough to score points, and nobody cares if you finish 11th or 18th every race, and he was firmly in that like 11th category, but obviously at the end of the year it barely matters. So I am really happy to report that this time he got a pair of podiums, and most importantly he had a pole in the second race and a very hard fought P2 as a result. Yes, he didn't quite take home the win, but nonetheless, fantastic weekend, and I really hope it continues. Tiny bit of sad news though. Last time I've talked a lot about him, and this time he wasn't present. Kirill Small apparently not a part of the series anymore, or at the very least not on a full season program, which quite unfortunate. I feel like he would have been a bit of a dark horse even, maybe not for the title, but for a very good end result. But I suppose it might have only been a one-off appearance. Anyway, time for F1. Let's keep this short and sweet. Formula One was in Canada, and it's been, I like to say, the best race of the season so far. Some wet weather action throughout the weekend, and most importantly, still super tight performances across the top teams, with Verstappen versus McLaren versus Mercedes, like a five-way for the win and the podium positions. Truly a great race to watch, and this is what Formula One is supposed to be, at the very least when it's at its best. Verstappen did actually get the win once again, and if you only look at the end result, maybe it doesn't look that interesting, but trust me, if you haven't watched the race, he did have to work for that one. He basically had the reverse luck that Norris had at Miami, with fortunate safety car timing to give him crucial track position, but nonetheless, Red Bull is not untouchable anymore by any stretch of the imagination, so we should expect these tight battles at the front to continue, at the very least throughout the next couple of rounds, and then we'll see what the upgrades bring, I suppose. Proof that Red Bull is not quite untouchable anymore is Perez, because Perez has, yes, signed another 2-year contract and then immediately celebrated it by getting P16 in qualifying and then binning it in the actual race after making literally zero progress throughout the event. Disgusting, quite frankly, not as in Paris is disgusting, but this shouldn't be allowed if you've got a top car. I am one of the Paris defense squad normally, you know. I am of the opinion that it's hard to make a good argument for a driver that's going to be definitely better and is available for Red Bull at this moment in time. Sainz, in my opinion, would be a slight upgrade, but largely like a sideways move. And I do often say this, but I feel like maybe it's, now that it's tighter throughout the pack, maybe Perez qualifying deficiencies will hurt Red Bull too much. Because in the actual races, I still think he can just about do the job he is assigned to do and, you know, wheel the car around in the position it's supposed to be. But crucially only if he starts right around the correct position. When he starts at the back of the pack and everything is close, he can't really make progress at all. It looks like Bottas towards the end of his Mercedes stint in that sense. But obviously Bottas was a fantastic qualifier, and for him it only went wrong when something really went wrong in quali or early in the race or something. And for Perez, this is almost a given, if you know what I mean. So I don't know, these next 2 years could be rough for Red Bull if the car performances stay similar to what they are now. But of course it's F1 and we've got new regs coming in 2 years anyway, so one thing is guaranteed, they won't. Equally, Ferrari had a bit of a shocker after obviously winning Monaco purely on merit. They now qualified in P11 and 12 and were struggling with issues throughout the race, with Sainz making just some mistakes, to be honest. He just didn't have the best weekend, and Leclerc had an engine issue. It did produce the funniest moment of the race though, with Leclerc arguing with his engineer in classic Ferrari style, essentially asking for information and then complaining that he did not get the information he asked for. And yeah, at the very least, Ferrari still provides entertainment even if they can't really score any points. Now then, let's move back to some junior Formula racing, but this time in the US. USF 2000 had a doubleheader at Road America, and the championship couldn't be much closer. Sam Corey is closing the gap to Max Garcia little by little with a win in the first race and another P4 in the second race, while Garcia was sort of stuck more towards the middle of the top 10 throughout the weekend, if that is fair to say. So not quite the front-running force we've seen in particular in the first couple of weekends of the year. Evagoras Papasavas conceded P2 in the standings with a lap 1 wreck in the first race. I might be showing it to you here. So that once again opens the championship even further. And then we now also have Max Taylor closing into that championship battle with a win and another podium. So at the very least, 4 people solidly in that championship contention at the moment. I don't really want to focus too much time on these front runners though, because honestly, there's other guys we need to highlight every now and then. And this time I picked Michael Costello, and I couldn't have picked a better weekend to do so really, because he showed both of the things I wanted to highlight in one weekend. Fantastic coincidence really. I actually decided this beforehand, because this guy so far throughout the season has been very quick, especially for a rookie. He's been one of the top rookies in terms of raw pace displayed, but he's been incredibly crashy and inconsistent and tumbling down the order, getting in incidents, getting around wide, like everything you can imagine really. He kept finding ways to keep going backwards on the timing tower, even though his pace indicated he should have been going forwards. Now then, this time we have, we have a good example of this time around in race 1, where he put it on the front row in quali and then immediately ran off in turn 1 trying to go for the lead. And yes, he somehow recovered to P8, which is also quintessential Michael Costello, where other guys, might have just put it into a wall or something. No, he comes back and he still gets some decent points out of the whole thing. But yeah, what a wasted opportunity. And then in the second race, he finally secured a good result, brought home that P2. But once again, he actually almost binned it trying to go for the lead. I believe it was in Canada Corner, but just again, a bit of a daring overtaking attempt. He just doesn't seem to have the mindset that you need for a long championship like this. He seems laser focused on just getting the best individual race results that you can, which obviously you need to as a racing driver. But at some point, you probably also need to show the teams and the people you want to get hired from. You can actually keep the car in one piece and just do what the car is supposed to do and bring home points, because at the end of the day, that's what the money is, right? So I hope he can learn from this, because this guy, in terms of raw performance, clearly one to keep an eye on. Over in the USF Pro 2000s, things have gone a little upside down since we've last talked about it. With Nikita Johnson getting a disqualification from races in the past, so he's dropped some points anyway. And now Lockie Hughes had a dominant hat-trick this weekend, 3 wins, so that's now up to the championship lead actually. His main rival throughout the weekend has been Christian Brooks, who continues to be very, very solid, albeit I wouldn't really call him a championship contender. He's had too many off weekends so far for that, in my opinion, but nonetheless looks like a really solid guy. And yeah, Nikita Johnson now actually down in P3 in the championship, not just behind Hughes, but also behind ever consistent Denmark, which super surprising to me, to be honest, because he always seems to be in the top 5, but I've never really had him down as a potential race winner, if that makes sense. So yeah, we will see how this championship continues to play out, but maybe it isn't so Nikita Johnson one-sided after all. Then again, it looks like it won't matter, because hopefully we'll have Nikita in Europe next year anyway. I do want to highlight another guy though, in a very similar way to Michael Costello actually, and this is Simon Sykes. Again, a rookie stepping up to this particular category, and once again a rookie who, yes, had pace, but also a bunch of incidents. And for him, it's not as characteristic as for Costello. It definitely hasn't been the case every weekend, but he has also done this a fair bit. I'll show both of these to you here. In race 1, he ran wide fighting Mossman for P2 in the last corner of the race, so that was really unnecessary and just a huge loss of points. And then in the second race, he had something very similar happen as well. Yes, he got a decent P5 in the last race, but even then there was some struggling and some dropping down and some fighting back. So clearly potential there, but once again, someone who just tends to have more scrappy weekends than you can probably afford if you want to be in that title hunt. Then again, I hope for Simon Sykes in particular, he's the perfect candidate for a second year in the category. But then again, so is Costello in the USF 2000s. Last but not least, we have Denny Dieselski, also been talked about a fair bit this weekend as someone who's, been a little inconsistent, quite up and down, but with great pace all around. And this time he has actually, sort of fulfilled this potential and has been consistently at the top of the midfield, while Riccardo Escotto, Matt Clark and Braden Eves, all of those, and they're all obviously like in that midfield bubble normally, had horrific luck. Matt Clark I want to highlight in particular because it's the second weekend in a row, or rather even the third. I don't remember how he did at the Oval, to be fair, but the last road course weekend he also had horrific luck. So I hope this gets better again, but man alive, it was rough to watch. Now then, we've all been waiting for it. Time to talk about IndyNXT, and it was a Jamie Chadwick controlled weekend. There have been so many haters and doubters going into not just this season, but also last season, and despite her clearly visibly improving over the course of last year, and it went from barely able to stay just outside the top 10 to working her way into the top 10 to slowly climbing up the top 10, there was visible, clear, logical, understandable progress over the course of last year, and yet we had people saying, no, she's never going to get anywhere, she's never going to do anything, she's not good enough. And from the outside, I'm on the record saying she will at least get a podium or two on merit. And it turns out she already did. But even then, I did not expect her to find a win this early on in the season. And to be honest, I didn't expect her to ever get a win like this much on merit in like full domination mode, even though obviously she's got very competitive teammates in the same machinery to go up against, and even beating Louis Foster in the very same car, keeping him behind all race long, soaking up the pressure from him and Abel through a bunch of restarts. So really, this is about as clean of a motor racing victory as you can have. So for everybody who's been doubting Jamie Chadwick's racing driver ability, maybe reconsider. Who am I to tell you? But turns out, I guess she can drive cars pretty well, can't she? Now then, there have obviously been other storylines playing out over the weekend, and one of the key ones is actually Nolan Siegel not participating in the event. We'll talk about it in the Indy segment in a little bit, but he's been called up to step up to IndyCar proper, at the very least for the time being, which means he is effectively out of the championship fight, really, with last weekend being rough anyway. And then a DNS essentially means it's at the moment between Abel and Foster, and then who knows, maybe we'll have like Kaya Collette with the late season surge or something, as I'm hoping for. But Siegel now out of contention in my opinion, especially if he actually stays in IndyCar, of course. I do want to highlight a driver we have not talked about at all in IndyNXT though, and this is Josh Pearson. I don't know if you know Josh Pearson. If you only watch the Formula side of things, you may have never, actively recognized him just because he's a bit anonymous in IndyNXT. Last season it was, he was there, he wasn't embarrassing himself, and that was about the only thing you could reasonably say about him. But if you follow IMSA and sports cars, you might know him as a really good young talent and a guy who's rapid in an LMP2, much like Nolan Siegel, for example. So it's a bit curious that for him it never translated to IndyNXT, or at least, at the very least, last season it didn't. This time around though, he's had what I think is his best weekend in the category so far. Only a P7 finished. I looked it up. I think he finished P6 once last time, but the grid was a lot weaker, and I think it was like a crash race or something. This time it was purely on merit, scrapping in the midfield to even upper midfield all race long. And I really hope this means he has finally clicked with single seaters, because if his sports car performance is anything to go off, the guy actually has proper talent. But don't get me wrong, I wouldn't quite bet on it just yet. Now then, time to talk about the big one over in IndyCar. And truth be told, I didn't even watch the entire race, not to its fullest. I've been listening to the Swedish broadcast, and since I don't speak Swedish, this means I've been essentially just listening to a random foreign language and some engine noise. Obviously, I've gone back through it a little bit, but Haven't watched this quite as thoroughly as I normally do. Still a few things I want to highlight though. Mainly, Magnus Lundqvist on pole. Great performance there in qualifying, and then only to get taken out by teammate Max Armstrong in turn 1. That was very interesting to watch, and classic IndyCar at this point, just continuing where they left off at Detroit. This essentially turned the race upside down right on lap 1 and quickly shuffled into utter Penske domination. And this is really the key story we can unpack from this, because we've had this at a few tracks this season where Penske has just been the team to beat. Really, so far it feels like they've been the only dominant team. Either it's been very mixed or it's been Penske, and this has been one of the all Penske weekends. Actually, with the Penske 1, 2, 3, Will Power finally winning a race ahead of Newgarden and McLaughlin. Palou at least back to the Mr. Consistent in P4, even though he looked almost anonymous in the race, like the quintessential Palou run where he just does what he has to do. Crucially for the championship, this has a couple implications, because with Power winning and Palou back to being the Mr. Consistent, this opened up the championship lead for those pair, because Dixon actually didn't really score any meaningful points because he suffered, I believe it actually wasn't a puncture, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe he only literally just hit the tire cliff and lost like 10 positions on one lap because there wasn't a tire left. And then he got forced onto a really suboptimal strategy, and essentially that was the end of it, and I think he finished in like P21 or something. So in Scott Dixon terms, this is utterly horrendous, and therefore means, yeah, couple new guys up ahead of him in the championship. This is the one thing in IndyCar we'll have until the end of the year. This thing will stay close, or at the very least, that's what it looks like at the moment. Quick shout out to the young drivers. We've already talked about Siegel. Unfortunately, in the race itself, he was quite anonymous. Then again, he's driving for Dale Coyne. You didn't really expect anything. With him, I mainly want to highlight how he got here. We've talked about the Canapino drama last time out, but I think it's actually ridiculous. Obviously, the death threats to Pucher, and then Canapino doubling down on it and saying his fans don't do anything wrong, and actually Pucher is a pussy or something. I don't quote me on this, but probably not what he actually said. But, you know, I feel like we get the point. I'm glad he's benched if this is his attitude. It's one thing if South American sports fan mentality is just a bit more emotional than maybe we normally accept in like Europe or North America, and that's fine. You'd say, obviously, you probably shouldn't take it to social media, but then again, I'm also a firm believer in, you know, you can just block people. Pucher can just block the people sending him death threats. They're obviously not serious death threats, right? It's not a huge deal. The internet is just a weird place, and it is what it is. The driver actually endorsing the behavior is disgusting, and yeah, glad he's benched, glad Siegel is in, but I am looking forward to see how this story further unfolds, because I'm pretty sure this hasn't been the end of it just yet. There's another young driver though we need to highlight, and that's Kyffin Simpson, and obviously he's also gotten a fair bit of hate for even being in the series, and obviously no doubt about it, he is there at least a year too early because he is absolutely loaded. But nonetheless, this was his best weekend to date by putting it on P12 in qualifying, and obviously great run there. Unfortunately, his race only lasted about 5 laps before he got taken out by Christian Rasmussen. He was running P10, I believe, at the time, so he would have been on for hopefully a really good result. But maybe this can be another lesson to the people doubting him just because of his IndyNXT results last year. Yes, he is a pay driver, as are all of them in one way or another. And he is in IndyCar a year too early, again, no doubt about it. But he is absolutely rapid in sports cars, and we've seen with the likes of Siegel and other people, it does translate. It often translates, especially when you're so young that you can actually then learn the new car, no problem. So don't count him out just yet. He is a young talent after all. This was all I had to say about the week. It's been a lot. Once again, it's been a lot. So now is your time to let me know all of your thoughts down in the comments about the Siegel drama, for example. This is one of the very interesting topics of the week, I feel like. And otherwise, I hope to see you next week because we will have a bit of a special episode. There's not much Formula racing going on next weekend, so we can actually do a proper deep dive on some of them. And in particular, we can finally talk about British F4. Some of you have been asking in the comments, and obviously I am interested to finally dive into that properly as well. So you might want to subscribe in order not to miss next week's episode. Otherwise, thank you all for watching, and I hope to catch you then.